At dinner, Grandpa said, "How's the allowance, son? 7 grand a month should keep you comfortable?" My wife chuckled. "Yeah, he's been very comfortable lately." I froze. I'd never seen a dollar. I'm working 3 jobs. I pulled up statements. Every transfer sent to her account. Grandpa went silent. My phone buzzed. The bank's security team wanted to verify a new joint account in her name. Look, I'm not saying I'm a martyr or anything, but if there was an Olympic event for juggling sleep deprivation, financial anxiety, and a wife who thinks hustling means posting motivational quotes on Instagram at 2 in the afternoon, I'd take home the gold every single time. My name's Luke Harrington. I'm 31 years old, and I've somehow managed to convince myself that working 3 jobs simultaneously is a perfectly reasonable way to exist in modern America. Spoiler alert, it's not. But when you're trying to keep your head above water in a 1 bedroom apartment that costs more than a kidney on the black market, you do what you've got to do. My day starts at an ungodly hour that most people associate with either insomnia or questionable life choices. 4:30 in the morning, to be exact. That's when I drag myself out of bed, stumble over the yoga mat my wife Sabrina insists on leaving in the middle of the floor because apparently it's part of her morning manifestation routine, and make my way to Morrison's shipping warehouse on the edge of town. For 5 hours, I load boxes onto trucks, and let me tell you, there's nothing quite like hefting 60-pound packages of God knows what while your lower back screams at you in languages you didn't know existed. The guys I work with are solid. Bunch of early birds who've accepted that this is just what life looks like when you're trying to make rent in a city that thinks avocado toast is worth 15 bucks. We don't talk much, mostly because we're too tired and too focused on not getting crushed by a pallet of discount furniture heading to some suburb where people actually have guest rooms. By 10 in the morning, I'm done at the warehouse, which means I've got just enough time to wolf down whatever gas station breakfast sandwich I can grab, chug enough coffee to wake a small village, and head over to my second gig. I'm a certified HVAC technician, which is a fancy way of saying I fix people's air conditioners and heating units when they inevitably break down at the worst possible moment. Summer in this city is brutal, and winter isn't much better, so I stay pretty busy crawling through attics that smell like decades of regret and squeezing into crawl spaces that were clearly designed by someone who hated human beings. The pay's decent, better than the warehouse at least, and there's something satisfying about solving a problem. Even if that problem is just a clogged filter or a thermostat that someone's been jabbing at like it owes them money. But here's where it gets really fun. After spending my afternoon elbow deep in ductwork and explaining to yet another homeowner that no, their 20-year-old furnace is not going to magically heal itself, I head home for exactly 45 minutes, just long enough to shower off the dust, grime, and existential dread, and maybe sit down for 10 minutes before I'm back out the door for job number 3. That's right, folks. I deliver takeout for one of those app-based food services that's slowly destroying the restaurant industry while simultaneously keeping broke people like me employed. From 6 at night until whenever the orders stop coming, which is usually around 11 or midnight, I'm driving around town in my beat-up Honda, hauling pad thai, burgers, and overpriced salads to people who tip anywhere from generously to not at all. It's a gamble every time, like a lottery where the prize is either 5 bucks or soul-crushing disappointment. Now, you might be wondering why any sane person would willingly put themselves through this kind of schedule. The answer is simple and depressing: money, or more accurately, the lack of it. My wife, Sabrina, and yes, that's her real name, like the teenage witch or the Instagram influencer, take your pick, works from home. And I use the word works very loosely here because what she actually does is something she calls building her brand. From what I can tell, this involves taking photos of our apartment from strategic angles that hide the water stain on the ceiling, posting captions about self-love and abundance, and spending an alarming amount of time arranging coffee mugs by color. She's got a whole collection of pastel ceramics that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. And apparently, this is what success looks like in the year of our Lord, 2024. Don't get me wrong, I love my wife. I married her for reasons that made sense at the time. She's beautiful. She's got this infectious energy that makes you believe anything's possible. And when we first met, I genuinely thought we were building something together. But somewhere along the way, building something together turned into me building while she curated. She's always got some new project, some new collaboration with a brand that sends her free stuff in exchange for exposure, some new course she's taking on how to monetize your authenticity. Meanwhile, I'm out here monetizing my spine, my sanity, and whatever's left of my will to live. And our apartment is what real estate agents call cozy, and what normal people call, we can't afford anything bigger. It's one bedroom, one bathroom, and a kitchen so small, you can touch the stove and the fridge simultaneously if you really commit to it. Sabrina calls our decorating style minimalist, which I'm pretty sure is just code for we own 3 pieces of furniture and a concerning number of throw pillows. The place always smells like coffee, not the good kind from a fancy cafe, but the kind from a $12 bag that I brew in a machine and I got on clearance 3 years ago. There's also a persistent undercurrent of what I can only describe as frustration, which probably has something to do with the fact that I'm never here, and when I am, I'm too exhausted to do anything but collapse. But here's the thing I keep telling myself. The little lie that keeps me loading trucks and crawling through attics and delivering Kung Pao chicken at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. I thought we were okay. I really did. Sure, money was tight, and sure, I was working myself into an early grave, and sure, Sabrina's idea of contributing to household expenses was buying groceries once a month and calling it an investment in our health. But I thought we were managing. I thought we were a team, even if I was carrying most of the weight. I thought that eventually things would get better. Her brand would take off, or I'd get promoted, or we'd win the lottery or something. Anything would change. I had no idea that change was coming, all right? Just not the kind I was hoping for. Because here's what nobody tells you about working 3 jobs and barely keeping your head above water. You stop paying attention to the details. You stop checking bank statements as carefully as you should. You stop asking questions about where money's going because you're too busy trying to make more of it. You trust the person you married to have your back because what else are you supposed to do? And that trust, that stupid, naive, completely understandable trust, is exactly what sets you up for the kind of betrayal that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Right now, in this moment, I'm still the guy who thinks he's hustling for a shared future. I'm still the guy who believes that if I just work hard enough, everything will be fine. I'm still the guy who's about to walk into a family dinner at his grandfather's house and have his entire world turned upside down by 7 words and a bank account number. I'm still the guy who has no idea that his wife has been playing a completely different game this whole time and that he's been losing without even knowing he was competing. If hustle were a personality type, I'd absolutely be the mascot. Exhausted, caffeinated, and completely clueless about the financial fraud happening right under my nose. But hey, at least the coffee's hot, the work keeps coming, and I've still got enough denial left to think that everything's going to work out just fine. Spoiler alert, it's really, really not. If there's one thing you need to understand about my grandfather, Arthur Harrington, it's that the man operates on a completely different frequency than the rest of humanity. While most people his age are content with early bird specials and complaining about how nobody makes a decent lawnmower anymore, Grandpa Arthur's out here living like he's got a personal vendetta against the concept of retirement. The guy's 78 years old, built like a fire hydrant with better posture, and has more money than God, or at least more than anyone in our family has ever bothered to count. He made his fortune doing something with real estate and cattle ranching back when people still wore cowboy boots unironically. And now he spends his golden years hosting elaborate Sunday dinners where he can lord his success over everyone, while simultaneously being the most generous person you've ever met. It's a paradox wrapped in a bolo tie, and I love him for it. So when Grandpa called and invited Sabrina and me to one of his classic Sunday dinners, I knew exactly what I was walking into. 3 hours of passive-aggressive compliments, enough food to feed a small militia, and relatives who only remember your name when they need to borrow money or a truck. The Harrington family gatherings are legendary for all the wrong reasons. We're talking about the kind of events where your aunt brings up your college dropout phase from 15 years ago, your cousin brags about his boat that he definitely can't afford, and someone always ends up crying in the bathroom by dessert. It's like Thanksgiving, except it happens monthly and nobody has the excuse of tryptophan to explain their behavior. I just finished a brutal 12-hour shift that started with me loading industrial equipment onto trucks at dawn and ended with me delivering Vietnamese food to a guy who answered the door in a bathrobe and tipped me exactly 73 cents. My back was screaming. My feet felt like they'd been replaced with concrete blocks, and I still smelled like a delightful combination of truck oil, insulation dust, and someone else's pad CU. Sabrina, on the other hand, looked like she'd just stepped out of a photo shoot for a magazine called Women Who Married Down But Make It Fashion. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready, which I know because she documented the entire process on her Instagram stories with captions like Sunday dinner energy and blessed to have family. I'd spent 2 minutes throwing on the least wrinkled shirt I owned and hoping nobody would sit too close. We pulled up to Grandpa's ranch style house just outside the city limits, the kind of place that screams, I have land, therefore I matter. The driveway was already packed with cars. My parents' sedan, my brother Derek's pickup truck that he treats better than his actual children, and my Aunt Linda's SUV that still has a My Kid is an Honor Student sticker from 2009, despite the fact that her kid is now 30 and works at a vape shop. The air smelled like mesquite and impending family drama, which is basically the Harrington family cologne at this point. Inside, Grandpa had set up his dining room like he was hosting a summit for moderately successful people who peaked in the 90s. The table was long enough to require 2 tablecloths, covered with his mother's good china that nobody was allowed to put in the dishwasher, and loaded down with enough food to violate several agricultural regulations. We're talking a roast beef the size of a toddler, mashed potatoes whipped to the consistency of cake frosting, green beans that had been boiled into submission until they'd lost the will to be green, dinner rolls that could double as hockey pucks, and a gravy boat that I'm pretty sure was a legitimate boat at some point. Grandpa stood at the head of the table, wearing his standard uniform, starched button-down shirt, leather ranch boots that had never seen actual ranch work, and a gold watch that probably cost more than my car. The usual suspects were all there, arranged around the table like chess pieces in a game nobody wanted to play. My mom kept shooting me worried looks, probably because I looked like I'd just survived a natural disaster, which wasn't far from the truth. My dad was already on his second beer, which meant he'd be asleep on the couch by 8. Derek was busy showing everyone photos of his truck's new rims, because apparently that's what passes for personality in this family. Aunt Linda was interrogating Sabrina about her business, which Sabrina handled with the grace of someone who's had a lot of practice explaining how taking pictures of coffee mugs counts as employment. And my cousin Jessica was live tweeting the entire event. Because the only thing better than experiencing family dysfunction is sharing it with 400 strangers online. We made it through the first course with minimal casualties. Grandpa asked me about work, and I gave him the sanitized version that didn't include the part where I'd seriously considered faking my own death to get out of my delivery shift last Tuesday. Sabrina talked about a huge collaboration opportunity with a tea company, which I'm pretty sure meant they sent her free samples in exchange for a post. My mom tried to get everyone to say what they were grateful for, which went about as well as you'd expect. People mumbled generic things about health and family while clearly thinking about when they could check their phones. Then we got to the main course, and that's when everything went sideways faster than my life savings, which, spoiler alert, wasn't very far because I didn't have any. Grandpa leaned back in his chair with that particular smile he gets when he's about to say something he thinks is generous, but is actually about to detonate someone's entire existence. He looked directly at me, raised his glass of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and said those 7 words that would change absolutely everything. How's the allowance, son? 7 grand a month should keep you comfortable. I want you to understand something about this moment. Time didn't just slow down, it completely stopped. Every fork in that room froze midair, like we were in some kind of Norman Rockwell painting titled, The Exact Moment Luke Realized His Life Was a Lie. 7 grand a month. $7,000. That's $84,000 a year. Just hand it over free and clear. That's more than I made at 2 of my 3 jobs combined. That's the kind of money that would mean I could quit loading trucks at 4:30 in the morning. That's the kind of money that would mean I could sleep past dawn without my alarm clock screaming at me like I owed it money. And I had absolutely no idea it existed. My wife, my beautiful brand building, manifestation journaling, pastel mug collecting wife, let out this little giggle. You know the kind, the one that sounds like wind chimes, but feels like a knife. She looked around the table with this practiced smile and said, "Oh, he's been very comfortable lately." And everyone laughed. They actually laughed. Like this was some inside joke that everyone was in on, except the punchline, sitting right there smelling like truck oil and broken dreams. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My brain was doing mathematical gymnastics, trying to figure out how I'd been living off instant ramen and gas station coffee while apparently receiving enough money monthly to actually have a life. The green beans on my plate suddenly became the most interesting thing in the world, because if I looked up, if I made eye contact with anyone, I was going to lose it right there in front of Grandma's good china. Allowance? I finally managed to croak out, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else entirely. I tried to laugh it off. Because that's what you do when your entire financial reality just got exposed as a complete fabrication in front of your whole family, right? You laugh, you make a joke, you pretend that your grandfather didn't just casually mention that he's been sending you enough money every month to actually live like a human being while you've been out here cosplaying as a Victorian factory worker with 3 jobs and a caffeine dependency that would make a truck driver weep. So I forced out this weird chuckle that sounded more like I was choking on a dinner roll and said, "Allowance? What allowance?" Hoping that maybe this was all some elaborate prank, like Grandpa had mixed me up with Derek, or maybe he was going senile and thought I was someone else entirely, someone who actually had access to their own money. But Grandpa just laughed, a full, hearty laugh that echoed off the walls of his dining room like we were sharing some hilarious inside joke. "The 7,000 I've been sending every month since 2019, son. You and Sabrina both get it. Set it up right after your wedding. Figured you kids could use a little help getting started." He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather or the score of last night's game, not the fact that he'd been depositing what amounted to a decent salary directly into an account that I apparently had no idea existed. Since 2019. 2019, that was 5 years ago. 5 years of monthly deposits. I did the math in my head, and let me tell you, math is a lot harder when your brain is simultaneously trying to process betrayal and keep you from flipping a table full of your grandmother's heirloom china. $7,000 a month for 5 years. That's $420,000 and $420,000 that had somehow vanished into the ether while I was loading boxes, fixing thermostats, and delivering pad thai to strangers who couldn't be bothered to tip. I almost dropped the casserole dish I was holding. And actually, I did drop it a little. It hit the edge of my plate with a clang that made Aunt Linda jump and spill her wine. The green bean casserole, which I'm pretty sure was made sometime during the Reagan administration based on how it tasted, nearly became a casualty of my existential crisis. My hands were shaking, and not from the physical exhaustion that had become my baseline state of existence, but from pure, concentrated rage mixed with confusion and a healthy dose of what the actual hell. I pulled out my phone right there at the dinner table, which normally would have earned me a lecture from my mother about respect and family time and how nobody can have a conversation anymore because everyone's glued to their screens. But she didn't say anything. Nobody said anything. They all just watched as I opened my banking app with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. The screen loaded with agonizing slowness, probably because even my phone's data connection was exhausted from my lifestyle. And there it was, my checking account balance, sitting at a whopping $347. $347. That was it. That was the sum total of my financial existence after working approximately 4,000 hours over the past year. But I didn't stop there because I'm not completely stupid, just apparently stupid enough to not notice large-scale financial fraud happening in my own marriage. I did what any exhausted, betrayed, increasingly homicidal husband with Wi-Fi and childhood trauma would do. I started digging. I went to my email, scrolled past the 17 unread messages from various delivery apps telling me about shifts I'd missed or ratings I'd received, past the promotional emails from companies selling things I couldn't afford, past the spam about extending warranties on cars I didn't own, and found what I was looking for. The folder labeled Foundation Transfers, the Harrington Family Foundation. Of course, Grandpa had set up a whole foundation. The man probably had a foundation for his foundations. And there they were, lined up like little soldiers of fiscal responsibility, monthly transfers, regular as clockwork every single month since June 2019. $7,000, sent with a memo that said monthly stipend, Luke and Sabrina Harrington. Every transfer had a routing number, an account number, a confirmation code. Everything was documented, organized, legitimate. Except the account number didn't match mine. Not even close. I looked at the last 4 digits of the receiving account. Then I looked at Sabrina's phone sitting on the table next to her wine glass, the case decorated with pressed flowers and inspirational quotes. I'd seen her account number before. She'd asked me to transfer money to her a few times when we first got married, back when I was naive enough to think our money meant something mutual. The numbers matched. Every single transfer for 5 solid years had been routed directly to an account that only my wife had access to. I looked up from my phone slowly. like a horror movie character realizing the call is coming from inside the house. Sabrina was suddenly very interested in her salad, pushing arugula around her plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Her face had gone from influencer glowy to oh no, I've been caught pale in about 3 seconds flat. She looked like someone had just unplugged her brain and forgotten to plug it back in. Oh, she said, and her voice had that careful quality people use when they're trying to construct a lie in real time. That's weird. I thought it was our account. Like our joint account. She did this thing with her hands, waving them vaguely like she could conjure a reasonable explanation out of thin air through interpretive dance. Our account, our account. I let that word sit there for a second, marinating in its own absurdity. Our account? I repeated, and I could hear my voice getting dangerously quiet, which anyone who knows me understands is way worse than yelling. That's funny, Sabrina. Really funny. Because I've never met this our account. We've never been introduced. I don't have the routing number. I don't have the account number. I don't have a debit card. I don't have online access. And judging by the fact that I've been eating 79-cent ramen for dinner 3 times a week, I definitely haven't been making any withdrawals from it. Derek snorted into his beer. My mother made a sound like a tire slowly deflating. Aunt Linda's eyes went wide, and I could practically see her mentally composing the group text she was going to send the second she got to her car. Jessica had stopped live tweeting and was now just openly filming because apparently my financial devastation was content gold. Grandpa's face had gone from jovial to granite in record time. His jovial grandfather routine had completely evaporated, replaced by the guy who'd built a multi-million-dollar empire through a combination of smart investing and probably some light intimidation. Who changed the routing? He asked, and his voice had dropped about 3 octaves into a register that made everyone sit up straighter. Sabrina was stammering now, her influencer composure cracking like cheap nail polish. It's just, it made sense, For family expenses, it's easier if it all comes to one place. I handle the bills and the budgeting and the household management, so it's just more efficient if... Family expenses? I interrupted, and I could feel every hour of every shift I'd ever worked crystallizing into pure distilled anger. Family expenses like what exactly? Like your bi-weekly nail appointments that cost more than my grocery budget? Like the 12 different subscription boxes you get every month? Like that manifestation retreat in Maui that cost $1,200 so you could learn how to ask the universe for things, which, by the way, you apparently didn't need to do because you were already stealing from me? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked like an extremely attractive, well-photographed fish. It's not stealing, she finally managed. It's our money. We're married. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is... Mine is apparently also yours, I finished. Funny how that works out. Grandpa's face had progressed through several shades of red that I didn't even know existed in nature. We're talking colors that would make a fire truck look pale, hues that suggested his blood pressure was currently attempting to escape his body through sheer force of will. He looked like he was about to either have a heart attack or flip the entire dining room table. And honestly, I wasn't sure which option I was rooting for at this point. The man had built his fortune on handshake deals and old-school principles like honor and integrity, concepts that apparently my wife had decided were optional guidelines rather than actual moral imperatives. Not anymore, Grandpa said, and those 2 words came out with the kind of finality usually reserved for judges handing down life sentences or gods smiting civilizations. He wasn't yelling, and that's how you knew it was serious, because Grandpa only got quiet when he was truly, genuinely furious. The kind of furious that meant lawyers were getting called, accounts were getting frozen, and someone's name was probably getting removed from a will with the speed and efficiency of a military operation. The entire room went silent. And I mean actually silent. The kind of silence where you can hear every little sound that normally gets drowned out by conversation and clinking silverware. The ceiling fan above us made this rhythmic clicking noise that I'd never noticed before, probably because I'd never been present for a family dinner where the primary entertainment was watching my marriage implode in real time. Someone's phone buzzed on the table, probably Jessica's, because she was absolutely getting notifications from people watching her live stream of this disaster. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to be ticking more loudly, like it was counting down to some inevitable catastrophe. My mother, bless her eternally optimistic heart, tried to salvage the situation with the kind of determination that only a woman who'd survived 40 years of Harrington family gatherings could muster. Arthur, she said in that placating voice she uses when she's trying to prevent disasters, the same voice she'd use when Derek crashed his first car, or when I announced I was dropping out of my master's program to work 3 minimum wage jobs. Let's not ruin dinner. We can discuss this later, privately, like adults. I made your favorite pie, cherry with the lattice crust, and it would be such a shame to let it go to waste over a simple misunderstanding about finances. A simple misunderstanding. Right. That's what we were calling grand larceny committed by your daughter-in-law against your son now. A simple misunderstanding. Like accidentally grabbing someone else's coffee at Starbucks. Not systematically redirecting nearly $500,000 over 5 years, while your husband worked himself into an early grave wondering why he couldn't afford to go to the dentist. But it was too late for pie, cherry, apple, or otherwise. Dinner wasn't just ruined. Dinner was murdered, desecrated, and having its eulogy read by a very angry septuagenarian in cowboy boots. Dessert was officially canceled, possibly forever, and I was approximately one sentence away from updating my Facebook relationship status to financially scammed by spouse, with a lengthy explanation post that would make my cousin Jessica's live stream look like amateur hour. Sabrina was doing that thing she does when she's backed into a corner, where she cycles through her entire repertoire of emotional manipulation tactics, like she's scrolling through filters on Instagram. First came the wounded innocence. I can't believe you're all ganging up on me like this. Then the righteous indignation. I was trying to help us build a stable financial future. Followed by the classic deflection. If Luke had just communicated better about wanting access to the account, I would have. And finally, when none of that worked, she landed on her go-to move, tears. Not real tears, mind you, but those carefully cultivated tears that influencers practice in mirrors, the kind that make your eyes look dewy without ruining your mascara. Derek, who normally has the emotional intelligence of a particularly dense brick, actually said something useful for once in his life. Dude, that's messed up. Even I keep my money separate from Rachel's, and we've been married 8 years. Coming from a guy who once tried to claim his boat as a tax deduction because he'd thought about maybe using it for fishing commercially someday, this was damning. Aunt Linda was furiously texting under the table, her thumbs moving so fast they were practically smoking. I could only imagine the messages. You will not believe what's happening at Arthur's house right now. Sabrina has been stealing from Luke. Stealing for years. I always said that girl was too pretty to be trustworthy. Call me immediately. My dad had given up all pretense of following the conversation and was now just working on his third beer, staring at the ceiling like it might open up and rapture him out of the situation. I couldn't blame him. If I'd had alcohol in front of me, I would have been doing the same thing, except I'd been too busy working 3 jobs to develop a proper drinking problem. Grandpa stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like judgment itself. He walked over to the antique cabinet where he kept his important papers, because of course he kept important papers in the dining room, ready to whip out at a moment's notice during family gatherings. This man was always prepared for everything, including apparently the discovery that his granddaughter-in-law was a con artist with a ring light and a dream board. He pulled out a folder, an actual physical folder, because Grandpa still believed in paper trails the way religious people believe in scripture, and started flipping through bank statements. Every month, he muttered, more to himself than to us. $7,000 transferred on the first. Never missed a payment, not once in 5 years. And you're telling me, Luke, that you never saw a single dollar of it? Not one, I confirmed, and my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I've been working 70-hour weeks, Grandpa. Loading trucks, fixing air conditioners, delivering food until midnight. I've been eating ramen and riding on bald tires because I couldn't afford new ones. Last month, I had to choose between getting my tooth fixed and paying the electric bill. I picked electricity. I've still got the toothache. My mother gasped. Sabrina had the audacity to look offended, like I was the one being unreasonable by bringing up the fact that I'd been living in poverty while she'd been living off my allowance. You never told me about your tooth, she said, which was possibly the most insane response she could have offered at that particular moment. I never told you because every time I brought up money, you said we needed to stay positive and trust the process, or Some other crap you read in a self-help book written by someone who inherited their wealth. I shot back, and I could feel 5 years of swallowed frustration finally finding its voice. You kept saying your brand was about to take off, that we just needed to invest a little more in your content, that the universe would provide. Turns out the universe was providing. It was just providing directly into your personal checking account. Grandpa slammed the folder down on the table, making the china rattle. Priya, he said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling Priya. Priya was Grandpa's lawyer, a woman so competent and terrifying that she'd once made a district judge cry during a deposition. If Grandpa was calling Priya, things were about to get very legal very fast. Sabrina's face went from influencer pale to actually scared white. That's really not necessary, she said quickly. We can handle this internally as a family. There's no need to involve lawyers and make this into some big legal thing. You made it a legal thing when you committed fraud, Grandpa said simply. The rest of dinner unfolded like a particularly depressing episode of a reality show that nobody asked for, but everyone was too horrified to stop watching. We all just sat there, pushing food around our plates in silence, because apparently even the Harrington family's legendary ability to argue through any situation had finally met its match. What do you even say after discovering that one family member has been systematically defrauding another family member for half a decade? Pass the roles just doesn't have the same ring to it anymore. When you're sitting across from someone who's been bankrolling their entire lifestyle with money that was supposed to help you afford basic dental care. Sabrina had retreated into her phone, probably composing some cryptic Instagram post about betrayal and misunderstanding that would make her followers think she was the victim in all this. I could practically see the caption forming in her head. Sometimes the people closest to you don't understand your vision and shall stay strong, misunderstood minds, all trust the journey. Derek was texting Rachel, probably warning her that family dinner had gone nuclear, and she should prepare the guest room because there was a non-zero chance I'd be sleeping on their couch tonight. My mother kept trying to make eye contact with me, her face doing that thing where she's simultaneously sympathetic and disappointed, like she's sorry this happened, but also maybe if I'd been more attentive to my finances, this could have been avoided. Aunt Linda had given up on subtle, under-the-table texting and was now just openly typing what I assumed was a novel-length expose to every person in her contact list. My phone was sitting on the table next to my plate of congealed mashed potatoes and green beans that had long since given up any pretense of being edible. I was staring at it, wondering if I should call my bank right now, in the middle of dessert that we weren't eating, when the damn thing started buzzing. Not a text, an actual phone call, which in this day and age basically means either someone died or you're about to get scammed by someone claiming to be from the IRS. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize, and normally I would have let it go to voicemail because I get approximately 17 spam calls per day asking me about my car's extended warranty or my non-existent student loans. But something made me answer it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the universe finally deciding to give me a break after 5 years of cosmic pranks. Or maybe I was just so emotionally demolished at this point that I figured, why not add one more element of chaos to this already perfect disaster of an evening? Hello, I answered, and my voice sounded like I'd been gargling gravel, which made sense considering I'd spent the last hour having my entire financial existence revealed as an elaborate lie. Mr. Luke Harrington? The voice on the other end was female, professional, and had that particular quality that immediately makes you sit up straighter, even when you're already sitting at a dinner table surrounded by your family's judgment. That's me, I said, glancing around the table. Everyone had stopped pretending to eat and was now openly staring at me, because apparently my phone call was the evening's next scheduled entertainment. This is Franklin Trust Security calling. We're reaching out regarding some unusual activity on accounts associated with your name and social security number. Specifically, we received a request earlier today to establish a new joint account under your name with a Mrs. Sabrina Harrington, with Mrs. Harrington listed as the primary account holder and full withdrawal privileges. We're calling to verify that you authorize this request and are aware of this account establishment. Time did that thing again where it stops being a linear concept and instead becomes this thick, syrupy substance that you have to wade through. A new joint account. Today. She'd tried to set up another account today, presumably after realizing that the gravy train of Grandpa's monthly deposits might be coming to an end now that the family was asking uncomfortable questions. She was trying to legitimize her access to my money or set up a new pipeline or something equally calculated and absolutely infuriating. I looked up from my phone, making direct eye contact with my wife across the table. She was frozen, her fork halfway to her mouth, and her face had gone through pale and landed somewhere in the neighborhood of translucent. She looked like someone who'd just realized that their entire scheme was unraveling in real time during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner with roast beef and small talk. No, I said into the phone, my voice steady, despite the fact that my hands were shaking so badly. I almost dropped my cell phone into my mashed potatoes. I did not authorize that request. I have no knowledge of any new account. I need you to freeze that immediately and flag it as fraudulent activity. Sabrina's fork clattered onto her plate. Luke, wait, you don't understand. I held up one finger, silencing her with a gesture that I'd learned from Grandpa himself. The universal sign for, I'm on the phone and you need to shut up immediately. The woman from Franklin Trust continued, I understand, Mr. Harrington. We'll halt the account establishment immediately and begin a fraud review process. Given the circumstances and the amount of suspicious activity we've flagged, we're going to recommend a complete audit of all accounts associated with your social security number. You'll need to come into one of our branches within the next 48 hours to verify your identity and review all account access privileges. We'll be sending you a detailed email within the next hour outlining the steps you'll need to take. Thank you, I managed, and I meant it. This random bank security employee who was probably just doing her job and following protocol had no idea that she'd just potentially saved me from whatever fresh hell Sabrina had been planning. I'll be there first thing Monday morning. We'll have everything ready for you, Mr. Harrington. I'm sorry you're dealing with this situation. We take financial fraud very seriously at Franklin Trust. She sounded genuinely sympathetic, which was more than I could say for half the people sitting at this dinner table. I ended the call and set my phone down very carefully, like it was made of something fragile and expensive, rather than the cracked screen disaster that I'd been meaning to replace for 2 years but couldn't afford because apparently I'd been funding my wife's influencer lifestyle instead. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear Aunt Linda's phone buzzing with incoming responses to her gossip fest. A new account, Grandpa said, and his voice had gone past angry and landed somewhere in the realm of impressed by the audacity. You tried to set up a new account today? Today? After we just discovered the first one? Sabrina was doing her crying thing again, but this time, even she seemed to realize that tears weren't going to work. I was trying to fix it, she said, her voice doing this quavery thing that might have worked on me 5 years ago when I still thought love meant trusting someone completely. I was trying to set up a proper joint account so Luke would have access too. I was trying to make things right. By listing yourself as the primary account holder with full withdrawal privileges, I asked because I'd been paying attention to what the security woman had said. How exactly does that make things right? How does setting up another account that you control help me access money that I should have had access to all along? She didn't have an answer for that. Or if she did, she was smart enough not to say it out loud in front of Grandpa, who looked like he was mentally calculating exactly how fast he could have her removed from the family trust entirely. And Derek was shaking his head in disbelief. My mother looked like she wanted to cry, and my father was on beer number 4 and had completely checked out of reality. Grandpa leaned over then, close enough that only I could hear him, and whispered something that I knew I'd remember for the rest of my life. Son, next time, marry someone who knows what honesty costs. That phone call had cracked something open in my brain, like when you finally pry open a jar that's been stuck for years, and everything inside comes spilling out all at once in a mess of realization and regret. Suddenly, I was sitting at my grandfather's dining room table, surrounded by cold roast beef and family members who couldn't decide whether to comfort me or silently judge me for being an idiot. And my mind was doing this thing where it was rapidly flipping through every moment of my marriage like the world's most depressing slideshow. You know those montages in movies where the main character suddenly realizes they've been blind to something obvious the whole time and they show all these little clips with dramatic music playing? Yeah, it was exactly like that. Except instead of dramatic music, the soundtrack was just the sound of my own voice in my head saying, "You absolute moron," on repeat. The borrowed money from my wallet that never came back. God, how had I been so stupid about that? It started small, innocently enough. 20 bucks here, 40 bucks there. Babe, I forgot my wallet. Can I grab some cash? Or, I'll pay you back on Friday when my collaboration payment comes through. Except Friday would come and go. And another Friday, and eventually I'd forget I'd even lent her the money because I was too busy working 3 jobs and operating on 4 hours of sleep to keep track of every small transaction. But it wasn't small, was it? When I actually thought about it, really added it up in my head, we were probably talking about thousands of dollars over the years. Thousands of dollars that just evaporated into the void of her handbag, never to be seen again, while I was out here rationing my coffee and buying the generic brand of everything because I thought we were broke. Then there were the Amazon packages. Oh, the packages. They arrived with the frequency and reliability of a mail order addiction, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. Each one labeled with that little smile logo that now felt like it was mocking me personally. Sabrina always had an explanation ready. It's for content creation, or I need this ring light for better photo quality, or my personal favorite, this is a business investment, Luke. You have to spend money to make money. Business investments that looked suspiciously like designer handbags, expensive skincare products, a collection of crystals that supposedly promoted abundance, a Himalayan salt lamp that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and enough activewear to outfit a small yoga studio. Every time I questioned it, she'd get defensive and launch into this whole speech about how I didn't understand entrepreneurship or the influencer economy or what it took to build a brand in the digital age. And like an idiot, I believed her. Or at least, I convinced myself I believed her because it was easier than fighting about it after a 12-hour shift. But the memory that really made me want to punch a hole through Grandpa's decorative wall was the time, oh God, the time she'd told her friends she was supporting me. I'd come home early from my HVAC job because a client had canceled last minute, and Sabrina had been on a video call with 3 of her influencer friends, all of them sitting in their expensive apartments with their ring lights and their matcha lattes, discussing their relationships like they were product reviews. I'd only caught the tail end of the conversation, but I heard her say it clear as day. Yeah, Luke's been struggling to find his footing career-wise, so I've been the main breadwinner while he figures things out. It's been hard, but, you support the people you love. I'd stood there in the hallway, still holding my toolbox, covered in insulation dust and attic grime, and felt something inside me just crumple. But I'd talked myself out of being angry about it. I'd convinced myself that maybe she was just trying to save face with her friends, or maybe she genuinely believed she was contributing more because she didn't understand the value of physical labor versus posting photos online. I'd made excuses for her, swallowed my pride, and never brought it up because I didn't want to be the kind of husband who made his wife feel bad about how she talked to her friends. What an absolute chump I'd been. The rental car incident. Jesus, how had I forgotten about that? We'd gone to her friend's wedding in Napa Valley, which was already a stretch financially because I'd had to take time off from all 3 jobs, and we both knew I didn't get paid time off from any of them. Sabrina had insisted on renting a nice car because we need to make a good impression and everyone there is going to be successful and we can't show up in your Honda. So she'd rented this luxury sedan on what she said was our credit card, and when we returned it, she'd somehow managed to rack up an extra $400 in fees. Late return, premium gas that wasn't premium, some mysterious cleaning fee that made no sense. She'd promised to handle it, said it was all taken care of, and told me not to worry about it. I'd never seen any charge come through on my card, so I assumed she'd dealt with it through her business account or whatever. Now I realized she'd probably paid it with Grandpa's money, money that was supposed to be mine, money that I could have used to not work 3 jobs or fix my tooth or buy tires that weren't held together by prayer and stubbornness. And the trips, God, the trips she'd taken. The content creation retreat in Tulum, the networking conference in Austin, the brand partnership opportunity in Miami. She'd always framed them as investments in her business, necessary expenses that would pay off eventually when her following grew and the sponsorships rolled in. I'd stayed home, working my 3 jobs, eating ramen, and feeling vaguely guilty that I couldn't afford to go with her because someone had to pay the rent. Except I was paying the rent. And she was taking vacations funded by money that was literally supposed to be supporting both of us. She'd been living like a successful influencer on my allowance, while I'd been living like a broke warehouse worker on my actual salary. The meditation app subscription, the monthly flower delivery service for content, the expensive coffee beans that she insisted were necessary for her morning routine and aesthetic, the vintage furniture she'd bought off Facebook Marketplace that cost more than our monthly utilities, the professional photo shoot she'd booked to elevate her brand presence, the online courses about manifestation, abundance mindset, and becoming a six-figure entrepreneur. Every single one of these things she'd positioned as either a necessity or a minor splurge that we could afford. And I'd trusted her because why wouldn't I trust my wife? My biggest crime wasn't being too trusting or too busy or too tired to pay attention. My biggest crime was choosing love over math, romance over receipts, faith over financial statements. I'd operated under this naive assumption that marriage meant partnership, that for better or worse included, and we're honest about where the money goes, that the person you married wouldn't systematically rob you while you slowly destroyed your body, working three jobs to keep a roof over both your heads. Sitting there at Grandpa's table, watching Sabrina check her phone for the 17,000th time, probably composing her victim narrative for social media, I felt like the biggest sucker in the history of suckers. I'd been so busy trying to be a good husband, working hard, not complaining, trusting her, supporting her dreams, that I'd completely missed the fact that she'd been treating our marriage like a personal ATM with unlimited withdrawals and zero accountability. Derek caught my eye from across the table and gave me this look that was equal parts sympathy and "I told you so," because Derek had never particularly liked Sabrina. He'd said at our wedding that she seemed high maintenance, and I'd defended her, said he didn't understand her, that she was just ambitious and knew what she wanted. Turns out Derek wasn't being judgmental. He was being observant, and I was being willfully blind. The next morning, Grandpa summoned what he called a family meeting, but what everyone else understood to be a tribunal. When Arthur Harrington asks you to come to his study at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, you don't question it, you just show up and hope you're not the one on trial. Except in this case, everyone knew exactly who was on trial, and her name rhymed with Sabrina, the scheming financial felon. I'd barely slept the night before, lying on the couch in our apartment because I couldn't bring myself to share a bed with someone who'd been robbing me blind for 5 years while I worked myself into an early grave. Sabrina had locked herself in the bedroom, presumably doing damage control on social media and trying to figure out how to spin grand larceny into a misunderstanding about shared resources and communication styles. Grandpa's study looked like what would happen if a library, a courtroom, and a museum of masculinity all had a baby together. Dark wood paneling covered the walls. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held leather-bound volumes that I was pretty sure he'd never actually read but kept around for intimidation purposes, and various hunting trophies stared down at you with glass eyes that seemed to say, "We too were once alive and free, and look what happened to us." His massive oak desk dominated the room like a judge's bench, and behind it sat the man himself, wearing reading glasses and an expression that suggested someone was about to get their inheritance redistributed. I arrived first because I'd been awake since 4:30 anyway. Old habits from the warehouse job die hard, apparently. And because I wanted to make sure Grandpa knew I was taking this seriously. I'd even worn actual pants instead of my usual rotation of work jeans that smelled faintly of whatever job I'd most recently finished. My mother showed up next, clutching her purse like it was a security blanket, and shooting me these worried looks that mothers specialize in, the kind that say, "I love you, but also, how did you not notice this was happening?" Derek arrived with Rachel, who'd insisted on coming for moral support, and also probably because she didn't want to miss the drama. Aunt Linda was there too, naturally, because she had a sixth sense for family disasters and wouldn't miss this for anything short of her own funeral. Sabrina showed up last, 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors like she was a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi rather than a woman about to face the financial consequences of her actions. She'd dressed in what I recognized as her serious business outfit, the one she wore when she had meetings with potential brand partners, all clean lines and neutral colors designed to make her look professional and trustworthy. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Grandpa didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk, because when you're 78 years old and rich enough to not care about social niceties, you can skip straight to the point. He held up a stack of printed statements that looked thick enough to be a novel, and not one of those short modern novels either. We're talking Tolstoy levels of documentation here. This, he said, tapping the papers for emphasis, says that every transfer meant for Luke, every single deposit sent from the Harrington Family Foundation to support both of you equally, Went straight to your personal account, Sabrina. Not a joint account. Not a shared account. Your account. The one that only you have access to. Care to explain? Sabrina removed her sunglasses with what I'm sure she thought was dignified grace, but actually came across as the dramatic gesture of someone who'd watched too many legal dramas. It was about administrative efficiency, she said, and I had to give her credit. Her voice was steady, like she'd been practicing this explanation. Managing money from multiple accounts is complicated and time-consuming. I consolidated everything into one place to make it easier to track expenses and manage our household finances. It's a common practice in modern financial management. That's a fancy term for theft, Grandpa said flatly, without missing a beat. He'd been doing business deals since before Sabrina was born, and he could spot corporate doublespeak from a mile away. My mother, bless her perpetually optimistic soul, tried to mount some kind of defense, because that's what mothers do. They defend their children's spouses right up until the moment it becomes absolutely impossible to do so. Arthur, she's young. She probably didn't fully understand the implications of what she was doing. These things can be complicated, especially for people who haven't had a lot of experience managing substantial amounts of money. Maybe she just made some poor decisions without realizing. She's 29, Janet, not 12, Grandpa interrupted, and the edge in his voice could have cut diamonds. She's old enough to vote, to drive, to get married, and to understand that redirecting someone else's money into your personal account without their knowledge or consent is called fraud. It's called theft. And in some jurisdictions, depending on how it's prosecuted, it's called felony embezzlement. Sabrina's carefully constructed calm was starting to crack around the edges. A muscle in her jaw twitched, and her hands were clenching her purse strap hard enough that her knuckles had gone white. I wasn't stealing from Luke, she insisted, and now her voice had that defensive quality people get when they know they're wrong but are committed to the lie anyway. We're married, what's his is mine, and what's mine is his. That's how marriage works. I was managing our shared resources in a way that made sense for our household, and if Luke had wanted access, he could have just asked me. I wasn't hiding anything. I'd been sitting quietly up until this point, trying to process everything and also trying not to say something I'd regret in front of my entire family. But that statement, that absolutely audacious, gaslighting, reality-denying statement, broke whatever fragile thread of composure I'd been holding on to. I've been living like a broke college student for 5 years, I said, and my voice came out way calmer than I felt, which was somehow more terrifying than if I'd been yelling. I've been working 3 jobs, Sabrina. 3. I've been loading trucks at dawn, fixing air conditioners in the afternoon, and delivering food until midnight. I've been eating instant ramen and day-old gas station sandwiches. I've been driving on bald tires because I couldn't afford new ones. I've had a toothache for 6 months that I couldn't get fixed because I had to choose between dental work and keeping the electricity on. And you've been living influencer life with my allowance while I've been literally destroying my body trying to make ends meet. So yes, I'd call that deliberate. I'd call that calculated. I'd call that exactly what Grandpa called it. Theft. The room went so quiet you could hear dust settling. Rachel was staring at Sabrina with unconcealed horror, the kind of look you'd give someone who just admitted to kicking puppies for fun. Derek was shaking his head slowly, and even Aunt Linda had stopped typing on her phone to give Sabrina a look that could freeze lava. Sabrina's face had gone through several emotions in rapid succession: defensive, angry, cornered, and now landed on something that looked almost like genuine distress, though with her I could never be entirely sure what was real and what was performance. You never told me things were that bad, and she said, and she actually sounded hurt, like I was the one who'd wronged her by not adequately communicating my poverty. You never said you were struggling. You never asked for help. How was I supposed to know you needed money when you never talked about it? Because you had all the money, I practically shouted, finally losing that calm veneer. You had $84,000 a year that was supposed to be mine, that Grandpa sent specifically to help me, and you spent it on content creation retreats and manifestation courses and whatever else you convinced yourself was a business expense. I was struggling because you took the money that would have kept me from struggling. Grandpa slammed his hand down on the desk and everyone jumped. Enough, he said. Sabrina, I don't care what mental gymnastics you've done to convince yourself this was acceptable behavior. I don't care if you think marriage means community property extends to fraud. What you did was wrong, it was illegal, and it ends now, today, this morning. Do you understand me? Sabrina glared at him with a look that suggested she very much did not appreciate being spoken to like a child, but she wasn't stupid enough to argue with the man who controlled the money. She gave a tight nod, her jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might crack. Good, Grandpa continued, because here's what's going to happen next. The next day, I found myself sitting in a coffee shop that served overpriced lattes to people who could actually afford overpriced lattes, waiting to meet with a lawyer that my buddy Mason had recommended. Mason was one of the few guys from high school who'd actually made something of himself. Went to law school, married well, bought a house in the suburbs, the whole success package. And when I'd texted him at 11 o'clock the previous night with, "Need a lawyer, wife committed fraud, send help," he'd responded within minutes with a name, a number, and holy shit, dude. The name was Priya Kapoor. And according to Mason, she was brilliant, terrifying, and exactly who you want when someone's screwed you over. Priya arrived exactly on time, which I was learning was a trait of people who had their lives together, unlike me who'd spent the last 5 years operating in a constant state of barely controlled chaos. She was probably in her late 30s, wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than my car, and carrying a leather briefcase that screamed, "I bill $400 an hour and I'm worth every penny." She ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, no fancy syrup flavors, and got straight to business before her cup even hit the table. "Mason filled me in on the basics," she said, pulling out a yellow legal pad and a pen that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget back when I thought I was broke. "Your grandfather's been sending you $7,000 monthly since 20, totaling approximately $420,000, all of which was redirected to your wife's personal account without your knowledge or consent. Is that accurate?" Hearing it laid out like that, in cold legal terms by someone who dealt with this kind of thing professionally, made it somehow more real and more devastating at the same time. "Yeah," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "That's accurate. I had no idea the money existed until Sunday dinner when Grandpa mentioned it casually, like I'd been receiving it all along." Priya made notes with the kind of efficient handwriting that suggested she'd done this approximately 10,000 times before. "And your wife's justification for this arrangement?" "Administrative efficiency," I said, and even saying it out loud made me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. She said it was easier to manage everything from one account. "Oh, and also that we're married, so it's all shared money anyway, and I could have just asked if I wanted access." "Right," Priya said, and her tone suggested she'd heard every variation of this excuse multiple times throughout her career. "The technically we're married, so I can do whatever I want with your money defense. Classic. It doesn't hold up legally, just so you know. California is a community property state, but that doesn't give either spouse the right to commit fraud or financial abuse. What your wife did, systematically redirecting funds intended for you into an account you couldn't access, that's textbook financial coercion. And depending on how we want to prosecute it, it could rise to the level of criminal fraud." She asked me a series of questions that got progressively more depressing to answer. Did I have access to any joint accounts? No. Did I know the passwords to her financial accounts? No. Had she ever given me detailed accounting of where the money went? Absolutely not. Had I signed any documents authorizing her to manage my finances? Not that I could remember. Did I have any assets in my own name? Just my embarrassingly empty checking account and a car that was worth maybe $1,500 if the buyer was drunk and generous. "This isn't just a divorce case," Priya said after about 20 minutes of questioning, setting down her pen and looking at me with something that might have been sympathy if lawyers were allowed to feel emotions. "This is fraud recovery. We're not talking about splitting assets or arguing about who gets the couch. We're talking about recovering stolen funds and potentially pressing criminal charges, though that's ultimately up to you and the district attorney if we can get them interested." She helped me set up new accounts that afternoon, accounts that only I had access to, with passwords that weren't my birthday or our anniversary or anything else Sabrina might guess. She walked me through enabling two-factor authentication, setting up account alerts so I'd get notified every time anything happened with my money, and creating a paper trail that documented everything. It felt like joining witness protection, except instead of hiding from the mob, I was hiding my finances from my own wife. Priya worked with the kind of calm efficiency that made me understand why Mason had recommended her. She wasn't emotional or judgmental. She was just ruthlessly effective at solving problems. Then came the forensic accountant. Grandpa had hired him, a guy named Jefferson who looked exactly like you'd expect a forensic accountant to look, which is to say, like someone who'd chosen to spend their life analyzing spreadsheets and had made peace with that decision. He was probably 60, wore glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed finding discrepancies in financial records the way other people enjoyed mysteries or crossword puzzles. Jefferson sent us a report 2 days later that was thicker than my tax folder, my lease agreement, and the instruction manual for my HVAC certification combined. Every single diverted dollar had been categorized, analyzed, and annotated with Sabrina's own descriptions from her expense tracking app, because of course she'd been tracking her expenses, she just hadn't been honest about where the money was coming from. The list read like a catalog of delusion: business cost, ring light and backdrop, travel, Austin networking conference, professional development, manifestation retreat, brand investment, designer handbag for content, soul retreat, Maui Wellness Week, soul retreat. She'd spent $1,200 of my money on a soul retreat while I was delivering General Tso's chicken at midnight to make rent. The audacity was almost impressive in its completeness. Jefferson had organized everything by category. Travel and retreats, $78,000. Clothing and accessories marked as brand investments, $42,000. Beauty and wellness, $31,000. Photography and content creation equipment, $26,000. Online courses and professional development, $19,000. And my personal favorite category, miscellaneous lifestyle expenses, $34,000. That last category included things like expensive dinners with her influencer friends that she'd called networking meals, subscription boxes, home decor for aesthetic content, and a $300 crystal that supposedly promoted abundance. The irony of buying an abundance crystal with stolen money was not lost on me. The remaining money, roughly $200,000, had apparently just vanished into general spending. Daily coffees and shopping trips and God knows what else. All of it marked in her tracking app as household expenses or business costs, or just left blank. Jefferson had noted in his characteristically dry accounting language, substantial funds appear to have been utilized for personal discretionary spending without clear business justification or household necessity. Translation: she'd been living like someone with a trust fund, while I'd been living like someone who needed to apply for food stamps but was too proud and too busy to actually do it. Priya reviewed Jefferson's report with the focus of someone reading a particularly engaging novel, making notes in the margins and occasionally muttering things like, "Unbelievable," and "This is going to be easy." After about an hour, she looked up at me and said, "Luke, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of financial fraud I've seen in my 15 years of practice." She documented everything herself. She left a paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. "If we take this to court, you'll win. The only question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges or just civil recovery." I didn't know how to answer that. Part of me wanted to throw the book at Sabrina, wanted her to face actual legal consequences for what she'd done, wanted her to understand that actions have repercussions and you can't just steal $400,000 and walk away with a slap on the wrist and a sad Instagram post. But another part of me, the part that had loved her once, that had married her believing in forever, that still remembered what it felt like when things were good, that part just wanted this to be over. "Let's start with recovery," I said finally. "Get the money back or whatever's left of it. Make sure she can never do this again. And then we'll see about the rest." Priya nodded and started typing on her laptop. "I'm drafting a letter to send to Sabrina and any attorney she might hire. It's going to use words like restitution, breach of fiduciary duty, and my personal favorite, cease and desist. She's going to understand very quickly that this isn't going away, and that every day she delays makes her legal position worse." Watching Priya work was like watching an artist, except instead of painting or sculpting, she was crafting legally binding threats wrapped in professional language, and the letter she composed was 3 pages of pure concentrated consequence. Each paragraph more terrifying than the last, all of it perfectly polite and absolutely devastating. She sent it that evening. I imagined Sabrina opening it on her phone, reading through the legal terminology, and finally understanding that our money wasn't going to fly anymore. 3 days after Priya sent the letter, 3 days that I spent sleeping on Derek's couch because I couldn't stomach being in the same apartment as Sabrina, my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood pressure spike just reading the preview notification. "Can we meet? Just the two of us? No lawyers, no family, just us talking like adults. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding and we can work this out peacefully. The message came with a suggested coffee shop location, one of those trendy places in the arts district that served beverages with names like Mindful Morning Blend and Transcendent Turmeric Latte. Because, of course, Sabrina would want to have this conversation somewhere that matched her carefully curated aesthetic. My first instinct was to delete the message and let Priya handle all communication, which is what she'd explicitly told me to do in her very clear instructions that included phrases like, do not engage directly and let me do my job. But there was this morbid curiosity gnawing at me, this need to hear what possible explanation she could offer that would make any of this make sense. Also, I'll admit it, part of me wanted to look her in the eye and hear her try to justify $420,000 of theft while I'd been working myself into an early grave. So I did something that Priya would probably bill me extra hours for disapproving of. And I texted back like, fine, tomorrow at 2. I'm bringing my lawyer. She responded immediately. Please, no lawyers, just us. Like I said, peacefully. I didn't respond to that because Priya had taught me that silence was often the most powerful negotiating tool, and also because I was absolutely bringing documentation even if I left Priya out of it. There was no universe in which I was walking into a meeting with Sabrina without receipts, literal and figurative. The next day, I showed up 10 minutes early because I wanted to pick my seat strategically, somewhere with my back to a wall so I could see her coming, somewhere public enough that she couldn't make a scene without witnesses. The coffee shop was exactly as pretentious as I'd expected. Exposed brick walls covered with local art that looked like someone had sneezed paint onto canvas and called it expression. Tables made from reclaimed wood that cost more than functional furniture, and a menu that required a small business loan to order from. I bought myself a regular coffee, just coffee, none of the adaptogenic mushroom situations they were pushing, and sat down at a corner table to wait. Sabrina arrived 15 minutes late, which was par for the course because she'd never been on time for anything in her entire life. Punctuality wasn't part of her brand, I guess. She was wearing sunglasses so oversized they could have doubled as satellite dishes, the kind that celebrities wear when they're trying to hide from paparazzi or, in Sabrina's case, when they're trying to hide the fact that they've been crying or stressed or possibly just trying to look like someone who has bigger problems than the consequences of their own actions. She'd dressed down, or what passed for dressed down in her world, wearing yoga pants that cost more than my first paycheck, and a hoodie that had some kind of minimalist logo that probably meant it was from a brand I'd never heard of and couldn't afford, even if I had heard of it. She sat down across from me and took off the sunglasses with what I'm sure she thought was dramatic flair, but mostly just looked exhausting. Her eyes were a little red, her makeup less perfect than usual, and she had this wounded expression that I recognized from every argument we'd ever had, where she'd been clearly wrong but wanted me to feel bad anyway. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she started, and I had to admire the sheer audacity of opening with that particular strategy. Not an apology, not an explanation, not even a let me help you understand my perspective, just straight to you're being unreasonable. I'm blowing this out of proportion, I repeated, keeping my voice level despite the fact that every muscle in my body wanted to flip the reclaimed wood table. Sabrina, you redirected $70,000 of my money per year for 5 years, $420,000 total, while I was working 3 jobs and living off ramen and gas station sandwiches. Please explain to me which part of my reaction is disproportionate to that reality. She sighed, actually sighed, like I was the one being difficult, like I was the one making her life complicated by having the audacity to notice I'd been robbed. It's not theft, Luke. We're married, we're a team. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours. That's literally what we promised each other when we got married. I was managing our household finances in a way that made sense. You're treating me like some kind of criminal when all I was doing was trying to build something for us. Teamwork usually includes informing the other teammate, I shot back, and I could feel that calm facade starting to crack. Teamwork involves communication, transparency, mutual decision making. You know what teamwork doesn't include? Secretly funneling someone's allowance into your personal account for 5 years while they destroy their body working 70-hour weeks thinking they're broke. That's not teamwork, Sabrina. That's fraud with better marketing. Her face shifted from wounded to defensive so fast I got whiplash just watching it. Oh, so now I'm a fraud? Is that what your grandfather and your fancy lawyer told you? That I'm some kind of con artist? I've been building a business, Luke. A real business with real potential. Those retreats you're so obsessed with, they were networking opportunities. Those unnecessary expenses, they were investments in content creation and brand development. You don't understand because you've never tried to build anything beyond a paycheck. And there it was. The thing she'd probably been thinking, but never quite said out loud until now. The underlying resentment that I was just a working class guy with working class ambitions while she was a visionary entrepreneur being held back by my small minded inability to see her genius. I've been building 3 different careers simultaneously, I said, and my voice had dropped to that dangerous, quiet register that I'd inherited from Grandpa. I've been building a life, Sabrina, or at least I thought I was. Turns out I was just funding yours. You love being dramatic, she snapped. And now the mask was really slipping, the Instagram perfect influencer persona giving way to the person underneath who was angry about being caught. You love playing the victim, acting like you're so noble and hardworking and suffering. You could have asked me about the money at any time. You could have checked the accounts. You could have been involved in our financial planning. But no, you were too busy being a martyr, working your 3 jobs, making me feel guilty every single day for not having a traditional career. And you love my allowance, I replied, matching her energy. You loved it so much you spent 5 years spending it without telling me it existed. You loved it so much you tried to set up another account last week with you as the primary holder. You loved it so much you built your entire lifestyle around it, while I was delivering Chinese food at midnight, wondering how we were going to make rent. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and I could see her mentally cycling through her remaining playbook of manipulation tactics. The victim thing hadn't worked. The we're a team thing hadn't worked. The you don't understand business thing hadn't worked. So she went for the jugular, the thing she knew would hurt, because she'd spent 5 years learning exactly where my insecurities lived. I should have married someone with less pride, she said, her voice cold and precise, designed to cut. Someone who wouldn't make such a big deal about money and who actually understood what it takes to succeed in the modern economy. Someone who could be happy for my success instead of feeling threatened by it. I sat there for a second, letting that land, feeling the intended sting of it. A year ago, hell, even a month ago, that probably would have worked. It probably would have made me question myself. Wonder if maybe I was being unreasonable. If maybe my blue-collar sensibilities were holding both of us back from some greater potential. But sitting there in that overpriced coffee shop, looking at this woman who I'd loved enough to marry but apparently hadn't known at all, I felt nothing but a weird sense of clarity. Should have married someone with fewer passwords, I said. And I actually smiled when I said it because the absurdity of the whole situation had finally caught up with me. Should have married someone who didn't have a forensic accountant on speed dial. Should have married someone whose grandfather wasn't rich enough to hire lawyers who charge $400 an hour. But here we are, Sabrina. Here we are. Her face cycled through about 15 different emotions in 3 seconds. Shock, rage, indignation, something that might have been actual hurt, and finally settling on cold contempt. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor loud enough that the barista looked over with concern. You're going to regret this, she said, grabbing her purse and her phone. When your lawyer bills start piling up and you realize what divorce actually costs and you're alone working your 3 pathetic jobs, you're going to wish you'd been reasonable about this. I already regret plenty, I said, staying seated because standing would have given her the satisfaction of thinking she'd gotten to me. But talking to you today isn't on the list. She stormed out, leaving her untouched $7 matcha latte on the table like it was a prop in a movie about wronged women and unreasonable men. The sunglasses went back on before she even hit the door, armor against the world that was finally holding her accountable. I sat there for another 10 minutes, finishing my regular coffee that cost $3 and tasted like freedom, watching through the window as she got into her car, a car that I now realized had probably been partially funded by my allowance, and drove away. My phone buzzed. A text from Priya. How did it go? I typed back, she called me dramatic and told me I'd regret this. Pretty sure that means we're on the right track. Her response came immediately. Perfect. That's exactly what people say when they know they're going to lose. See you tomorrow to go over next steps. I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip because the barista had witnessed that entire mess and deserved hazard pay, and walked out into the afternoon sun feeling lighter than I had in 5 years. Weeks crawled by with the kind of agonizing slowness that makes you understand why people say justice delayed is justice denied. Except in this case, justice wasn't delayed so much as it was buried under approximately 47 metric tons of legal paperwork, financial documentation, and the world's most passive aggressive email exchanges between lawyers who were getting paid by the hour to professionally insult each other. Priya was worth every penny of her $400 hourly rate, though. She handled Sabrina's attorney, a guy named Brad, who specialized in defending people who absolutely knew they were guilty but wanted to drag things out as long as possible, with the kind of ruthless efficiency that made me understand why Mason had described her as terrifying in the best possible way. The settlement negotiations were about as fun as getting a root canal while simultaneously doing your taxes and listening to your high school guidance counselor explain why your dreams weren't realistic. Sabrina's opening position, delivered through Brad with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed they had a case, was that she was entitled to keep everything because we were married and she'd been managing household finances in good faith. Priya's response, which she let me read before sending, and which made me laugh for the first time in weeks, essentially boiled down to absolutely not. Here's 400 pages of evidence showing exactly how your client committed fraud. And if we go to trial, I will personally ensure that every detail of this becomes public record. Brad's next offer was slightly more reasonable, probably because he'd actually read the forensic accountant's report and realized his client had documented her own crimes with the thoroughness of someone keeping a journal. We eventually settled on terms that Priya described as better than you had any right to expect, and I described as not nearly enough, but at least it's something. Sabrina agreed to return $215,000, roughly half of what she'd taken, because apparently the other half had been spent so thoroughly that even Jefferson, the forensic accountant, couldn't figure out where it had all gone. She'd pay it back in installments over 5 years, which meant I'd be 36 by the time I got the last payment, assuming she actually made them and didn't try to declare bankruptcy or flee to Bali to become a yoga instructor or whatever Plan B influencers have when their content creation careers implode. The divorce itself was surprisingly straightforward once the money situation got resolved, probably because we didn't actually have any assets to fight over. She got to keep her ring light, her collection of pastel mugs, her manifestation journals, and her delusions about being a successful entrepreneur. I got to keep my dignity, my 3 jobs. Well, technically, I'd quit the warehouse job by this point because Grandpa had insisted, and then I'd kept the HVAC work and the delivery gig until I figured out what came next. And my newfound understanding that love without financial transparency is just an expensive form of self destruction. The really interesting development came when Grandpa called me into his study again, this time without the tribunal atmosphere, and with significantly better whiskey. He poured us each a glass of something that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to cost, settled into his leather chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd won a war, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I'm replacing Sabrina as the trust coordinator, he said, which was possibly the least surprising news I'd heard since discovering that water is wet. And I'm setting things up so every penny goes directly to an account that only you control. New bank, new passwords, new everything. She'll never get near your money again. I nodded because that all made perfect sense and was exactly what should have happened 5 years ago if anyone had bothered to check whether the person receiving the money was actually the person the money was intended for. But then Grandpa said something that caught me completely off guard. That said, I want you to think about whether you actually want to keep receiving it. I must have looked confused because he continued without waiting for a response. You've been working 3 jobs because you thought you needed to, and yeah, part of that was survival. You did need to because your wife was stealing from you. But I've watched you these past few weeks, Luke. You've got the spark back that I haven't seen since before you got married. You're angry, sure, but you're also sharp, focused. Like you finally remember who you are when you're not being bled dry by someone else's ambitions. He took a sip of his whiskey, let that sit for a moment, then hit me with the real point. Money's like a hammer, son. Useful tool, dangerous weapon. If you take this allowance now after everything that's happened, are you taking it because you need it? Or are you taking it because you think you deserve it after what she did? Because those are 2 very different motivations, and only one of them ends well. I sat there turning the whiskey glass in my hands, watching the light refract through the amber liquid, and actually thought about it instead of just reacting. The truth was, I didn't need 3 jobs anymore. I'd quit the warehouse work, and the HVAC business was actually doing well enough that I could probably survive on just that if I was careful. The delivery gig was extra, something I kept doing partly out of habit, and partly because I'd made friends with some of the regular customers and didn't want to abandon them. With the allowance, I could probably quit both the delivery job and the HVAC work, live comfortably, maybe even save up for something big like going back to school or starting my own business or just existing without constant financial anxiety for the first time in my adult life. But Grandpa was right. There was something dangerous about taking the money now, after everything. It felt too much like a consolation prize, like I was trading one kind of dependence for another. I'd spent 5 years being unknowingly dependent on money I didn't know existed. Did I really want to spend the next however many years being knowingly dependent on money that came from someone else? Even if that someone else was my grandfather who actually meant well? I want to pause it, I said finally, surprising myself as much as him. Not forever necessarily, but for now. I want to see what it feels like to actually be my own man, standing on my own feet, making my own money without wondering whether I'm surviving or thriving, whether I earned it or inherited it. Grandpa smiled, a real smile, not the tactical one he used during business negotiations or family confrontations. That's what I was hoping you'd say, he admitted. But I needed you to choose it yourself. Money you don't need is power. Money you do need is a leash. I didn't build everything I have by being comfortable. I built it by being hungry. I'm definitely still hungry, I said. And we both laughed because it was true on multiple levels. He stood up, walked over to his desk, and pulled out a folder, because of course there was another folder. There was always another folder with Grandpa. That said, I'm not going to leave you completely without a safety net. I've set up an emergency fund in your name, $50,000. You can't touch it unless there's a genuine emergency. Medical crisis, job loss, act of God situation. Otherwise, it just sits there, earning interest and being available. The worst happens. Think of it as insurance against catastrophe, not a replacement for ambition. I took the folder, flipped through the paperwork documenting this new account, and felt something unexpected. Not relief exactly, but something close to it. Security without dependence. A cushion without a cage. Thank you, Grandpa, I said, and I meant it on levels I didn't quite have words for. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Thank me when you've built something that makes you proud. Thank me when you can look at your life and know that every bit of it is yours because you made it, not because someone gave it to you or took it from you. The next few weeks were an education in what it felt like to actually own your own existence. I kept the HVAC work because I was good at it and it paid decently, and there was something satisfying about solving tangible problems. Broken things that could be fixed with the right tools and knowledge. I quit the delivery job with mixed feelings because the money was unpredictable and the hours were brutal. But I'd missed some of the regular customers who'd started to feel like friends. Mrs. Chen, who always tipped 20% and asked about my day. The college kid in apartment 3B who was also working his way through school and understood the hustle. The night shift nurse who ordered Thai food at 1 a.m. and always left encouraging notes with her tips. My bank account, for the first time in 5 years, had a balance that didn't make me want to cry. Not because someone was depositing $7,000 into it monthly, but because I was depositing my own money from work I actually did, and I knew exactly where every dollar came from and where it was going. I opened my banking app without dread. I checked my balance without that sick feeling in my stomach. I paid my bills, which were smaller now that I'd moved into a studio apartment that cost half what the place with Sabrina had cost, and had money left over. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to buy groceries without calculating every item. Enough to get my tooth fixed finally. Enough to replace my bald tires. Enough to feel like a functional adult human being instead of a financial disaster held together by caffeine and denial. Sabrina tried her damage control online, naturally, because that's what influencers do when reality collides with their carefully curated image. She posted a series of cryptic quotes about betrayal and misunderstanding, about how some people fear strong women, about how growth sometimes means leaving behind people who can't evolve with you. Her followers ate it up, leaving supportive comments about how she deserved better and how inspiring she was for staying positive through difficult times. I didn't respond, didn't comment, didn't even look at her profile after the first couple of posts because Priya had been very clear about not engaging on social media where everything was documented and could be used in court. But I heard through the family grapevine, Aunt Linda, naturally, who'd become my unofficial source for all Sabrina related gossip, that the divorce and fraud allegations had cost her several brand partnerships and collaborations. Turns out companies don't love being associated with influencers who've been credibly accused of stealing $400,000 from their husbands. Who knew ethics mattered in the world of sponsored content and affiliate links? Now, when the bank calls, it's to confirm my signature, not hers. When I get an email about account activity, it's because I actually did something with my account, not because someone else was draining it without my knowledge. When I look at my financial future, I see possibility instead of mystery, potential instead of theft. My life wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. I was still figuring out what came next, still rebuilding from 5 years of unknowing exploitation, still processing the fact that the person I'd loved enough to marry had viewed me primarily as a revenue stream. But it was mine. Every bit of it, the good and the bad and the uncertain, belonged to me in a way that nothing had for half a decade. And if Grandpa ever asks me again, "How's the allowance?" I'll smile and say exactly what I said last week when he called to check in. Comfortable, Grandpa. Finally comfortable. Not because of what you're giving me, but because I finally know exactly what I have and what it costs and what it's worth. He laughed and said that was the right answer. I'm starting to think he might be right.